These are what are known as bulk cash transport. That's what $3 million in cash looks like. When I was 22 years old, I participated in a handful of bulk cash transports. The money would be loaded into the trunk of a Toyota, then driven down to the border. While not very sophisticated, it was very effective.
Did you go into Mexico?
No, of course not. We don't cross the border. What you do?
Why not?
So, because that's a separate operation.
Okay.
See, the group in Los Angeles is essentially a distribution network. Their operation requires them to get the money to the border. Just north of San Diego, just north of the border, there's a small town called San Ysidro. And before you get into Mexico, there's a McDonald's right near the border. And so what you do is you drive to, in my case, a Toyota Camry, run down to San Diego, go to the McDonald's, order some food around. Here comes the operative for the other group. So now he'll come over, give me a dollar bill, ask for change.
Right.
I give the guy 4 quarters, he goes on his way. At that point, I check the dollar bill because you're going to have a serial number. But that serial number has to correspond with the number I was given back in Los Angeles. So once the serial numbers match, at that point, I go into the restroom, pass the guy the car keys. He leaves in the vehicle. I just stay at the McDonald's.
Right.
20 some odd minutes later, the guy comes back, the car is parked, keys are under the floor mat.
That way you don't say,
yeah,
some guy showed up. I thought he was your guy. I gave him the money. I gave him the car.
I got the dollar as a receipt.
Right. So it had to be your guy.
Had to be the guy. And for the first couple of times, these are how people build credibility.
Right.
And like I said, for the first ones, I was 22 years old.
Right.
And so they were able to gauge how you carried yourself. And so for the first 2, there was a chase car. That way, they were able to confirm, hey, vehicle delivered.
Right.
Vehicle picked up. So now, once the money is taken into possession by the other group, it's out of your hand. You can provide an accounting. I got to the drop-off point. I got the receipt.
Right.
Everybody's in the clear. Now, what they do is they take the money and run it into Mexico. They got to get it down to Guadalajara.
Right. But nobody's stopping any cars going into Mexico.
At the time, no.
Okay.
I don't know how it is today, but back then, of course not. Nobody was getting any searches whatsoever. And remember, it's Mexican nationals going back into Mexico.
Right.
So it's not even, 21, 22-year-old Americans, which perhaps theoretically could get some level of scrutiny. You got just some guy coming home from work.
So when they get the cash back into Mexico, do they then try and put it into a Mexican bank, or do they leave it in cash form?
No, they definitely want to get it into a Mexican bank.
Right.
And
how hard is that?
Well, not very difficult, but it requires a tremendous amount of infrastructure to be in place. And so, what was advantageous for Sinaloa is their territory encompassed 4 of the principal tourist destinations. So they had control of Guadalajara, which is the second largest city in Mexico, which is essentially taking Chicago and Houston, adding them together. That's their city. Okay. So you've got tremendous amount of nightclubs, tremendous amount of strip clubs, all of these cash-intensive businesses that they can use to filter money through. They also had control of the resorts. And so right across the bay from Sinaloa is Cabo. Well, that metropolitan area encompassing both Cabo San Lucas and Los Cabos was essentially built by Sinaloa.
Right.
Because understand, when you see
they say how Mexico, they say building half of Miami was built by drug dealers.
Sure.
Okay.
Because the thing is, when American resorts go down into Mexico, they're essentially renting the property. The Ritz-Carlton doesn't build the resort. Hyatt doesn't build a resort. A cartel-owned property company owns the land. They lease it to a cartel-owned company that manages the resort. They have a second company that's responsible for the development company for building the resort.
Right. Okay.
So this is just all money circulating through various accounts. And then the American come in and say, hey, well, we're going to brand this thing a Hilton Hotel. Not realizing that the land it's on belongs to the cartel. The property is rented and the property is managed all by cartel front companies. Now, in order to get the money into the banking system, that's where it requires a large infrastructure. But again, having control of the American tourist areas provides them with a ready pretext. Why? Because Americans go down there and they're spending dollars.
Right.
And so between Cabo San Lucas and Los Cabos is a 20-mile stretch. Well, you could be staying in Cabo, going to the nightclubs in Los Cabos. Well, you're going to jump in a taxi and drive back and forth. Well, there are companies that maintain warehouses filled with taxis that never leave the warehouse. These are just phantom fares. That car's on the road 3 shifts every day. And at the end of the day, at the end of every shift, the secretary from the office, she's going to make cash deposits. Why? Because it's Americans renting them. The party buses that run from Cabo San Lucas to La Paz, those buses don't leave the terminal. But on paper, they're making 2 trips a day, filled with gringos.
Right.
The sport fishing boats. Cabo San Lucas is an enormous sport fishing area. Well, the charter boats are rented twice a day, filled with Americans. And as you can see, this provides a pretext for them to just say all these cash deposits.
Right, right. So if it made $12,000 today, you just say it made 20. We made 20,000.
If it made
today.
0, you just said it made 20.
Right, right.
A lot of times those charter boats don't even leave; they just stay in the marina. But on paper, they've made 2 trips filled with 7 tourists.
What's funny about that is I have a story.
Okay.
I think you've heard this before. I have a buddy whose dad took early retirement from Bank of America, took his retirement and went and bought a laundromat. I think I might have told you this. Bought a laundromat. And so of course he goes in, smart guy, he looks at the books. What have you been telling the IRS you made? Mm-hmm. And they're solid.
Yeah.
Like, it looks great. So, and he's like, look, I want like $500,000 or something for this 1 or 2 laundromats, whatever it was. I think let's say it's 1. So he's like, I want 300,000, let's say 300,000 for this laundromat. He's like, damn, it's really doing well. I got a real deal here. So he gives him 300,000, which is essentially a good chunk of his retirement, buys the place from the guy, and almost immediately he's not making nearly what this guy was making. And so then he ends up saying, okay, well, you know what? Maybe the employees are stealing from me. So he ends up letting like 2 of the employees go and starts working all the hours pretty much himself. He and like his wife or his kid, right? Whoever. Then he, that's not working. And then he starts running a few more ads. And then he just starts doing all these things. He struggles for 6 months to a year. And after a year, he's basically pulling more money out of his savings account, his retirement fund, to make the bills. Like, after a year, he's basically breaking even. Mm-hmm. And he realizes, like, I'm basically working for nothing at this point. So he said, you know what, fuck it. And he closes the whole thing up, and it's done. He closes. A few years later, he's reading the newspaper, and he sees the guy that he bought the laundromat from got indicted. For the past 15 years, he's been running 2 or 3 laundromats at one time. He would run them for 3 or 4 years, and then he'd sell them. But he was laundering money through drug money for dealers or whatever, traffickers or what distributors, whoever it was. He's running their money through, partly to get like 10% of the money is his, and partly, and he's making payments to like phantom employees, whatever. He's helping, making payments on loans that he doesn't have to give them their money back. But his real goal was to build up the portfolio for the business taxes for the actual business. Cause he's like, look, I can run an extra $500,000 through my laundromat and I can pay taxes on it. But after 3 years of doing that, it looks extremely profitable on paper. Mm-hmm. And I can just sell it and I'll make $300,000 and stick $300,000 in my pocket. So he had this whole thing. He did it for like 15 years. He got busted. I don't know how much time he got. But of course, you think, oh, well, that's, in a way, I think thinking about money laundering is kind of like, oh, it's almost like, who's really getting hurt? But the truth is, look, my buddy's dad lost his entire, probably half of his retirement. Like, he retired with almost like $1 million, $300,000 to get into it, another $100,000 $200,000 to try and keep it afloat for 2 years, and then just completely fucking went under. But yeah, so I mean, it's
well, here domestically in the United States, that's a common ploy that's used in Los Angeles. Several decades ago, the most popular athlete on the planet was Bo Jackson. And so This was in the summer of 93. And so me and a group of my buddies were all partying at a nightclub in Beverly Hills called the China Club. And so my buddy comes over, hey, you want to meet Bo Jackson? I lived in Los Angeles, but I was from Chicago. I actually grew up just a few miles away from Comiskey Park. Well, he was on the White Sox at the time. So I go over, I get introduced to Jackson. We bullshit for a little while. No big deal. A year later, I see him again at a nightclub down in Newport Beach. And so I walked over, reintroduced myself, and he remembered because there weren't too many guys from the south side of Chicago who had moved to Beverly Hills.
Right.
And so we had this whole little conversation. Like I said, spent a few minutes bullshitting. And then the second time around, he's telling me that he's making an investment. He's taking a look at this nightclub. He's like, man, this place is a gold mine. He's like, do you come here often? And I was like, I knew it was being used to launder money.
Right. Yeah, this is not.
And he's like, and so I'm like, I come here. It's, it's a little bit, I was actually out with my girlfriend, who's one of her friends' birthdays. It was more like, it wasn't the type of nightclub I normally hung out at. It was more of like a touristy trap place over in the Fun Zone area in Newport Beach.
Right.
But it was being used by people to surface capital. And so he's telling me about this thing as a gold mine. He's thinking about making an investment. He's like, you spend a lot of time in nightclubs. What do you think? And I said, look, sometimes things aren't what they always appear.
Right.
Like, I didn't tell him exactly what was going on. I said, just be very careful. He's like, well, because he brought in his accountants. He brought in,
It doesn't matter. It's been set up to fool all of them.
That's right. It's like, I had one of the principal targets in my case was an individual named Robles. And Robles owned a nightclub down in Orange County that on Thursday night threw the hottest party in Orange County for a couple of years. Probably about 2.5 years. It was a Disco 2000 party. And his nightclub was the host for Disco 2000 on Thursday nights, which, was enormous. Then on Friday and Saturday, it was a standard nightclub. And so he was able to take the proceeds derived from the sale of alcohol with respect to those 3 nights and then inflate it.
Right.
And so this is actually how I got introduced to the individual Lance Estes, who was the primary target of one of my other conspiracies. Because Lance was head of security at the nightclub, and he was Robles' right-hand man. And so he was responsible for, let's say, if you got 1,000 people all spending $300 a piece, that's $300,000 in gross sales.
Right.
Well, the next day they deposit $450,000. Like, he's taking the money to the bank with the girl that was responsible.
That's the way it looks better too, right?
Mm-hmm,
and
right.
There's some credit, like to just say, oh, it was all cash. No, it's better if there's some credit cards going through.
Sure.
There's some, whatever, back then checks, credit card, whatever's going through. That way it's a mixture of, just happens to be a little bit more cash than the average. Because the IRS they have statistics on what a typical club brings in. Sure. So if it's too out of character, then they could launch an investigation and say something's not right and watch it and try and figure it out.
When the nightclub is in a very wealthy area.
All right.
And you go there on any Thursday night, there's Lambos, Ferraris, Porsches parked out.
Cash back then is super prevalent.
Much more prevalent than it
now
is today.
It's almost non-existent at this point.
What was interesting about this particular setup is it was popular on Thursdays, Fridays, and Saturdays as a standard nightclub.
Right.
Sunday to Wednesday, there was essentially no business coming through there. Well, that provides the key opportunities to surface capital because a full nightclub limits your ability to raise money, to push money through.
Right.
Well, what this particular nightclub would do is they would have live music events. And so, back in the mid-1990s, the Orange County music scene exploded in popularity. Well, back in 93, like in the heart of the drug activity in my case, you had bands like Korn. Before they went on to achieve international stardom,
right.
They were playing this club. All these little Orange County bands that just cut their teeth playing at Robles' nightclub.
Right.
You might have, in fact, one of the Korn concerts is on YouTube. There's like 200 people at this nightclub.
All right. So what do you...
On paper, there's 1,000.
Yeah, I was going to say. Yeah.
So you've got, 800 people paying to cover, 800 people worth of phantom sales and alcohol.
All right.
And so on paper, that nightclub looks extremely successful because you've got 3 main nights, including one night, which is the hottest club in Orange County, and 3 or 4 nights a week with live shows. So someone like a Bo Jackson steps in and he's looking at the numbers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Same thing with the
Same
just
thing
like
happened,
with the IRS, the taxes.
Exactly what happened with your buddy.
Right. Who would pay extra money on taxes if they weren't making it? Like, that's insane. Yep. Like, and who would spend, 3 or 4 years setting this up? Like, that doesn't happen. So that's what people think. It does happen, but that's what they're thinking. Yeah, it's got to be legit.
That's why, the nightclub industry, I can speak from personal experience in Los Angeles, was just principally a money laundering venture. Whether it was, 2 popular nightclubs in Beverly Hills, there was one on the Sunset Strip, There were at least 2 down in Newport Beach.
Right.
They're just all pushing through money.
Right. What was I saying? Oh,
And the reason why the nightclubs are really, not only because it's a cash intense business, but you'll notice a club will have like a 2-year run or 3-year run, then they shut down.
right.
Then they'll reopen 6 or 8 months later. Well, that's a model that was generated by the Italians in the organized crime context, because that's how they set up the strip clubs. Because there was a guy who was South Florida. In fact, he's deceased, so I'll say his name, Michael J. Peters, who would go around setting up strip clubs. Like one of the guys in my case met with Peters to get in on a strip club out of Minnesota. And so they'll take a minimum of $1 million investment and they'll funnel it through the strip club. However, the way they would do it is they would take a business that's bankrupt.
Mm-hmm.
They purchased the bankrupt business to capture the tax loss credits. Because when you take that business and then inject new capital into it and operate it, you can write off those tax loss credits. So not only are you surfacing the money, but you're doing it tax-free.
Right. You're offsetting your taxes and you're able to launder the money.
And you're laundering the money. And then over the course of that next 3-year period, you're going to be able to write off all of the renovations as depreciation. So you're laundering the money through depreciation, you're laundering the money through the tax credits, and you're pushing the money through. Then 3 years later, you shut it down, reopen it after new renovations, transfer ownership to another company with accumulated tax loss credits, and just do it again. That's why you'll see nightclubs run for 2 years, shut down, reopen 6 months later under new management. That's just a common device that's utilized here in the United States. In Mexico, totally different.
Right.
Because in Mexico,
Aren't they more money laundering friendly?
well, here's the thing. In Mexico, first of all, there's no 2 o'clock in the morning shutdown alcohol. There's no last call. So they're selling all day. Also, particularly with respect to the nightclubs in the tourist areas. You ever been to Cancun? It's just spring break.
Yeah.
Every day is spring break. You go to Cabo, every day is New Year's Eve. I mean, it's just, nightclubs are just packed. Like a nightclub in Guadalajara holds 3,000 people. Clubs in Puerto Vallarta and Cabo San Lucas. Clubs in Cancun. Clubs in Mazatlan.
Right.
These are all controlled in Sinaloa territory. Well, a club that holds 3,000 people, if you've got $300 per person in sales, that's $900,000 in legitimate sales.
So instead of 300, you say each one spent $400
or $500.
Right.
And since you've got a tremendous contingency of Americans there, no one's going to be suspicious when they're dropping off all this cash in dollars.
Hey, you guys, you ever heard the term cool like the other side of the pillow? Listen, this pillow is great. It's called Ghost Bed. I personally have used one of their pillows because they make pillows, they make mattresses. I've actually slept on this pillow for the last few nights. It's a great pillow. Actually, I slept so good, I believe that there's a little bit of slobber right here. So I'm going to take this out. I'm going to take this off because that's disgusting. But listen, the pillow is made of this really, really cool fabric, and the cushioning is amazing. And it's not like it's a foam pillow. Like, it's super, super cool. And it was great because typically, honestly, I'll bet you I wake up and flip the pillow probably 5 or 10 times during the night just to try and keep it cool. I never had to flip this pillow one time. Super cool. The material is cool. It's you know what it reminds me of? It's kind of like it's a heavy pillow, but it's super soft. It reminds me of the difference between buying an iPhone, which you can feel that heaviness, it feels expensive and feels solid, as opposed to an Android. Anyway,
our listeners can get 50% off site-wide for a limited time. Just visit ghostbed.com/Cox and use the code COX at checkout. Again, that's ghostbed.com/Cox with the code COX at the checkout to save a whopping 50% off site-wide.
And so it's just a money-making venture that in Mexico, they don't look at a business plan as, is this going to make us money? They look at it as, can we push money through here?
Right.
As long as you could have a whole network of tanning salons. It doesn't matter. There may not be a single person that ever uses the beds. They're running 24 hours a day.
You don't feel like you need I don't feel like you need tanning salons in Mexico. Am I
Every-
wrong about that? Is that racist?
They're pretty popular here in Florida.
I mean, I feel like
Isn't here either. But
Yes. So any of these enclaves that attract American dollars serve as a perfect incubator for money laundering. In fact, one of the guys that we were friends with in prison, I don't want to say his name,
Right.
but he was a good friend of Arturo Beltran Leyva.
right.
And Beltran Leyva, Arturo, controlled the Acapulco region. And what they did is they controlled the strip clubs in Acapulco. Well, there were several of them that were very large clubs. And so I think one of them was referenced in your story, The Unlikely Narco. Was it the Palladium?
Sounds.
That's where, that's where Beltran Leyva would party. That's
Yeah,
where
yeah,
Barbie
yeah.
would party. Well, you take a club like that,
Yeah.
very high end. You know, this is where the drug lords are partying.
Right.
So they're all legitimately dropping, you know, multiple $1,000s on a round of drinks. Like it's
Right.
nothing. But more importantly, let's say you take a club of that size. Not only are you going to be able to push money through with phantom alcohol sales, but you've got what they were using was the women to serve as a vehicle. So let's say you've got 300 women on the workforce, and that's what works over the course of they got 3 shifts: day shift, afternoon shift, overnight shift. Right? At the end of their shift, each woman gets handed $500. Go deposit in the bank. Well, at the end of a month, that's $4.5 million for 300 women
Right. That are now in a bank.
that are now in a bank. At the end of a year, those 300 women have over $50 million sitting in bank accounts collectively.